probably get the show on the road pretty soon.
Oh, what happened? Oh, darn. Oh, I did something.
Oh. Can't see.
No, I don't have the screen anymore. Oh.
Katie, do you want to drive over to my house and have a glass of wine with me and watch Jeff's presentation? You're welcome.
Well, I was trying to close out some of the things that I had open, and I think I just, oh, goodness gracious.
I may or may not have a bottle of Fat Tire open over here, so, you know.
I have water.
I'm the presenter. I gotta stay hydrated, right?
Right.
You want me to wait a couple of minutes for you to figure out your screen issues?
No, that's okay. I'll probably figure it out eventually. Go ahead. Don't wait for me.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Erica.
It shows up on the screen that you're talking.
Yeah.
Pardon me? I see lightweight backpacking, but I don't see anybody. So, oh, wait a second.
Yeah, you're not going to see like cameras of anyone live as part of the meeting.
Okay. Oh, that's perfect then. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I could turn my camera on, but the background isn't really very interesting anyway. So.
Okay. Well, then all right. This looks very nice. The trees and lightweight backpacking.
Yeah, right. I see Bhargav just signed on.
Oh, yeah. There he is.
Did I pronounce his name right, Chrisanne?
Bhargava.
Bhargava? Hey, Bhargava, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I didn't realize this was only an online thing. I'm at the Presbyterian church and then it is closed. So I'm like, whoa.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Oh, no.
And so I'm in the parking lot in my car and then I dialed into with the phone. So sorry about that.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I can see the screen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the next one that's on a Wednesday, you'll want to be on a computer screen to see that one. This okay. One's mostly PowerPoint. It's not going to matter. But the other one will actually be looking at some topographic maps using some live tools. And so that one for sure you want to be on a big screen so you can appreciate all the squiggly lines and stuff on that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. I just didn't realize. I know you said online, but I didn't realize it was only online. I thought it'll be both. So never mind. My bad. I assumed that. So.
Okay. So should we get the show on the road then? Sounds like we got everybody. Just to remind everyone, Jennifer Tislerix is going to record this session just in case anybody misses. And we're going to try to put it on a private YouTube channel. So it won't be public or anything because I don't want to share the class info publicly anyway. But the intent would just be if someone misses tonight, that we'd have the capability of offering playback for those who missed.
And we can see it again, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'll share the link with the whole class.
Especially for those that are having trouble.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll figure out the technology, and for the next one, everyone will have it.
I think it's user error, Jeff.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of background on that. This is definitely experimental. I think this is the first time that we've, at least as far as I know in the history of the club, that we've ever tried to use an online tool to do some of the drier lecture stuff. So you guys can all tell me whether at the end whether you liked it or you hated it or you fell somewhere in between.
I think it'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. I work for a software company, and our company is a global one. So we have developers in Indiana and California and Europe and India. So we do this sort of thing all the time where we, all dial in and communicate using tools like this. So for me, I kind of take it for granted, but I know for a lot of people, this is brand new.
This is brand new. Yeah.
It's a first for me too, so.
Okay, cool.
All right. I'm just going to have to restart, I think, and maybe it'll work if I restart the computer or something. Cause I'm
You're going to completely reboot?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what else to do because I get on and it says join meeting, your meeting started, you're trying to join it, and it's just spinning. So
Okay.
maybe if I just reboot it and I'll see what happens.
Yeah, you
I
can try.
hear you, so that's okay. I
Okay.
can hear you, so.
Yeah, I think the alternative, do you have a smartphone?
That's what I'm talking, well, I have an Android, that's what I'm talking to you on right now.
Worst case scenario, you probably could have installed the app on your phone and connected that way. I think if you would URL just using your Gmail app, it probably would have taken you right to that.
Okay, all right.
And yeah,
Maybe I can try that.
Yeah, that's what I
Oh,
did.
yeah,
Since I'm logging in from the phone, I just downloaded the app and then I clicked on the link in the meetup and then.
Well, Katie, if you want to drive over while you're listening,
No,
you're welcome to.
that's okay.
Okay. You can come in your pajamas.
My bunny slippers too.
Yep. Mhm.
Hey. Okay. Well, I guess I'll start talking then.
Okay.
And hopefully you guys won't get bored to death. It's PowerPoint, what are you going to do? I've tried to keep the slides as interesting.
Just broke up.
Are you having a hard time hearing me, Tim? Tim, can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Oh,
Yeah,
I
Jenny,
can
can you
hear
hear
you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you sound fine.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Tim?
Lost him.
So one of the things when I've done this before at work, it depends on how good your Wi-Fi is in your computer processor. So if everybody's talking and your Wi-Fi isn't great, things will break up some. But just be patient.
And if we get a lot of background noise, you may see me mute some people just to keep the background as well. And if you have a question or something, you can always unmute yourself. So I'll be kind of watching that as well. Okay.
Okay.
Let's get going here.
Hey.
Okay, so the usual introductory stuff. For those of you who aren't familiar with solar, I think I know Leo, who's on the line, who hasn't really spoken up. I don't know that he's got audio. I think he's not a solar member, but this class is run by volunteers. We're just members of the solar club interested in sharing knowledge. We don't get paid for doing this. We're not certified guides, anything like that. So we're just folks who, in this case, know a little bit about lightweight backpacking, and we're here to share what we know with the rest of you. So brief introductions for those, of us instructors, and we'll do some introductions for students on Saturday. So I'm the guy in the orange helmet, if you haven't figured that out. I've been with solar since 2008. I'm also this year's lead instructor for the basic land navigation class that's coming up in May. So if any of you are signed up for that or thinking of signing up for that, you'll see me there too. I dabble in a bunch of stuff. You can see pictures of me ice climbing and rock climbing here, doing some orienteering, as well as backpacking. I typically lead one trip a year and I usually invite 4 to 8 people depending on where I'm going and what I'm doing. They're not necessarily ones that I announce to the club, but sometimes they are. It all depends on where I'm going and all that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about me and some pictures of me doing things the last couple of years. Alex, you want to say a word or two?
Sure. So I'm Alex. I met some of you, maybe most of you. Joined solar in 2016 with my wife and better half, who's in most of my pictures because she forces me to take them. So we took the beginning class in 2016, and then on the right, that's a picture of us, our first year backpacking with packs that were, when we went to the Sierras, our packs were like 45 pounds for a 4-day trip. And on the top left, which we'll get into, right, how to lighten your pack, we were at like 25, 27 pounds for a 7-day trip with spare canisters. So a lot of quick learning, and definitely, excited to share some of that knowledge of lightening my pack with you guys.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm Chrisanne. I know most of you. I've taught some of you. I'm the lead instructor for beginning backpacking. I'm going to help out on this class, and I help with intermediate backpacking as well. I've done a few big trips. Started off very heavy, have learned the error of my ways, and have found that I come into camp much happier with a 30-pound pack as opposed to my first trip to Isle Royale at 42. So.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about just briefly the itinerary for this class. So obviously this is our first one. It's an online webinar. Just sort of A, experimental, B, sort of helps us get, some of the lecture-y stuff out of the way without having to force everyone to travel around if they don't have the time to do that. And, some people may enjoy this format, and for some people this may not work great. Like I said, it's an experiment, so we'll see how that goes. We'll do this again on April 17th. And that one is a little more deliberate because we will be looking at some live, like, topographic map software, and we're talking about site selection and trying to use mapping tools to do some of that. And I felt like that stuff is really hard to do when you're in a classroom, especially for the folks who may be in like the third row, to really appreciate what's being projected, even on a decent projector. That can be hard to look at topographic maps on a screen. So I'm hoping it definitely works better there. So Saturday, April 13th will be the field day, which will be, pretty gear intensive. And the intent there is not to rehash a lot of stuff that we talk about in beginner backpacking class, but rather just to be specific about, what types of gear are we picking to go lighter, and why, and where are the pros and cons of using the lighter weight gear versus, some of the heavier stuff that many of us are introduced to, in a typical class or when we're out shopping and aren't specifically looking at lightweight stuff. We'll do some hands-on stuff. It looked like, from those of you who had filled out the survey online, that a few of you had attended Mike Hobig's make and take class, but not many. So we'll take an opportunity to make a little cat food can, alcohol stove, and I'll have materials and a pattern so you can also make a freezer bag cooking style cozy to take with you as well. And we might have another hands-on, depending on what Chrisanne is planning for the footwear part of the presentation that weekend. Right, Chrisanne? I don't know if she's still there. Looks like I lost her for audio.
Yeah, I dropped out a little while ago.
Yeah. So anyway, and then we'll do the practical, which I'll talk about in a minute, on the Easter weekend. So the field day is at the River Bend Shelter at Island Lake Rec area. So, just remember to bring weather-appropriate clothing. We will have a picnic shelter, which should have some picnic tables and stuff under it, but it's hard to say what the weather's going to be like that weekend, if it's going to be, cooler and windy versus, like a nice sunny day like it was today. I'd ask that you bring some trekking poles because we might practice using some of the tarps to set up tarp shelters. Bring items to prepare and eat lunch. There was a question on the survey but maybe doing a group style lunch, doing like, burritos, using instant refried beans and rice and stuff. And it would give us an opportunity to use some of the ultralight alcohol stoves and things just to play with those. So if you're interested in that, we can do that and bring supplies to do that, and just make sure you bring your own personal eating utensils and bowls or plates to eat off of or whatever, and bring note-taking supplies.
If you want me to help out bringing anything, Jeff, let me know. And also, if you need cat food cans, let me know that too. I have 4 cats.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I can get plenty.
Okay, I think I've got maybe 15 to 20 cans right now.
Okay.
Probably sufficient. I know Jen Teslarix also has lots of cats, and she had offered to bring a pile too. So
I can get some too.
This is what I'm kind of lost. What is the deal with the cat food here? What's going on?
It's for lunch.
What?
It's so easy. I've been driving all day, so I'm tired.
there is
food.
Just cats?
There's a super light alcohol stove design. It's a very simple design, and basically involves taking a small cat food can and you use a hole punch to cut some holes in the sides of it, and it becomes a very simple alcohol stove that you can use on the side. And so I've got a neat little pattern that you cut out of paper and you tape it to the outside of the can, and then you just follow the pattern to punch holes in the can, and that's pretty much all there is to it. It's very simple. Yeah. And so it'd be an opportunity to make one that you can then take home and, play with as part of an ultralight stove kit if you're interested in that. Okay.
And I see that there is no class next Wednesday, right, Jeff? Then in your agenda is only today and then 13th of Saturday, correct? There's nothing on 10th, which is the Wednesday.
Correct. Okay. Yep. Gives you guys some time to maybe catch up on reading the book, and stuff like that.
So where do I collect my book again? I don't think I was there last time. So
you and I need to talk about getting together to get your book.
Okay, let's do that later.
Maybe we should, talk or send some more emails or something.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff, what is the time for the field day?
I'd have to double check the itinerary, but I think it's like 8:30 or 9.
Okay.
Something like that, till like 4:30.
All right.
Or whenever we, finish and wrap up and get the heck out of there.
Sure.
Yeah. So it'll probably be a full day. I mean, we may run short. It depends. We didn't do a big lecture. The last time I did this class was in 2014. And in 2014, we didn't do these lectures. We tried to cram it all into one field day and then the practical. So the field day may go a little faster this year. It depends on how much hands-on stuff we spend time doing.
All right. I have the itinerary. It starts at 9 a.m.
Thank you. I don't have it in front of me.
I do.
So we will bring demo gear. I sent you guys a list of all the loaner gear that we will have with us. That went out via email about maybe 20 minutes ago. So if you're looking to borrow any lightweight gear for the practical, that's what we have to loan out. Okay, and we'll loan that out on a first come, first served basis. It's mostly tents and lightweight stoves, including a bunch of what I would call single user alcohol stoves. And there's a couple like ones that are more appropriate for 2 users in there. And then there are some lightweight sleeping pads and a few down quilts that we'll have available for folks to borrow too. We don't have a lot of ultralight gear, so I'm making it available what we've got. So look that stuff over, and Chrisanne will be helping me go through the usual, filling out forms and handing out gear on Saturday.
Are you also going to have some lightweight packs, Jeff?
We don't really have any lightweight packs in the club, and generally, when you're going lightweight. The pack is typically the last thing you get anyway, and the reason is when you buy a lightweight pack, the load carrying capacity of lightweight packs is significantly less than a 5-pound Gregory pack would be. Okay, a big Gregory pack can carry 45 pounds pretty easily, right? A lot of lightweight packs that weigh 2 pounds, their maximum load carrying capability may be 30 pounds. And so the last thing you'd want to do is take a pack that can carry 25 or 30 pounds and try to put 35 or 40 pounds in it. You'd be really miserable, right? So that's usually the last thing that we recommend anyone invest in anyway. So, you can still use a traditional pack and then try to just focus on the rest of the gear in the pack being as light as possible.
Okay, sounds good.
And we'll also, there'll be a couple extra handouts that we'll be handing out at the field day. There'll be the gear, the supplies, maps for the practical, and I'm not sure if there's like a water pump or something there, so I'll make sure I've got at least a 5-gallon container of water with us too, so that we can make lunch with that and people can, drink water if they're thirsty and so on. Speaking of the practical, for those who aren't familiar with Pinckney Rec area, this is a trail map of where we'll be spending our time. And I've kind of color-coded the trail that we'll be hiking along by day. So orange will be Friday evening, short little 1-mile hike into the Blind Lake campground. On Saturday, we'll be doing about 6.5 miles around to the Crooked Lake campground. The Crooked Lake campground is a car camping campground. And then from there, we'll only be about 1.5 miles hike out to Silver Lake on Sunday morning. So depending on what time we get up and get moving on Sunday morning, we'll be able to wrap up Sunday pretty early in the day. That's not going to be a long day at all. So we'll get copies of these maps handed out to everybody on Saturday, just so you know. If you're interested in the elevation profile, this is the type of thing that I print out for all my trips that I plan, is an elevation profile for every day on the trail so that everybody on the trip has an idea of all the ups and downs. So we will meet at Silver Lake ideally by 7 p.m. on Friday evening. We'll leave some cars there, and then we'll carpool to the little trail side parking lot off of Good Band Road. And again, sunset is at 8:20. So depending on how efficient we are at getting cars moved and getting on the trail and hiking in 1.5 miles, we may or may not be setting up tents as the sun is going down that evening. We currently have 3 campsites reserved at the Blind Lake campground. I didn't want to grab them all because who knows how many other locals will want to be out there hiking that time of year. But there's 13 students, 3 instructors. That gives us like average of 5 people per site. I'm hoping you folks make friends with each other at the field day and mostly arrange to sleep, 2 to a tent. That would really help us out in terms of having room at the campsites for everyone to stay. Sound good so far?
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the book for a minute. This is not the same book I used in 2014. I'll talk about the book that I used in 2014 in a minute. There's a couple of decent books about lightweight backpacking out. This is the one that I pick. It's the most relevant. Andy Skirka is definitely an ultimate hiker. He's hiked over 30,000 miles. He's also an ultra runner. Keep that in mind when you're reading about some of the things he recommends in this book. He's a pretty elite athlete. He also worked for several years with Sierra Designs, and specifically like that one-man tent you see there and the flex capacitor backpack that they currently offer. Those designs were heavily influenced by him when he was working there. I think he left 2 years ago. just to sort of do his own thing. He's now he guides trips. So he's running 6 or 7 guided trips this year. He's got folks like Heather Anderson helping him guide trips. She's one of his guides now. There's a bunch of other, what I would call backpacking sort of blogging celebrities that are involved with his trip guiding service as well. He's also published 6 different high route trail guides. So these are hiking routes in a lot of the big mountain ranges out west: Yosemite, the Wind River Range, the Sierra, High Sierra. But these are routes. These aren't necessarily on trail hikes. These are very challenging routes that go off trail and can be, quite difficult for a beginner hiker to follow, let alone hike, because they can go, up and down mountain passes that may not even have a faint use trail on them. So these are high to elite level hiking routes that he's put together, and some of his guided trips go over these routes as well. So he's a pretty high level guy. And the book itself is very information dense, which has its pros and cons. I think it's the most up-to-date, relevant book. It covers things like hammock camping and some of the other developments in the last couple of years that some of the other books do not. But at the same time, sometimes his authoring approach can be a little bit intimidating for the beginner. So keep that in mind. I know there's a lot of charts and tables in there. If you've been reading through the book, I'm sure you've noticed that.
Oh, yes, there's a lot.
Yeah. So it is what it is. I think it's definitely, though, the kind of book that you can continually refer back to and get a lot out of. So I read it cover to cover. If you can't manage to do that, definitely the third section of the book, which has a lot of sample gear lists for different destinations and different times of year, I think is very useful. And in addition to that, he has a web page where he blogs and posts articles and gear reviews and stuff. And it's a good way to add additional material that's not in the published book itself. So it's definitely worth visiting his website as well. There is a little bit of controversy in both the book and in some of the stuff he's published, though. Okay. And I wanted to bring this up because you may notice it if you've gotten that far on page 157. And if you have the book in front of you, you can turn to that now if you'd like and follow along. He's talking in there about what he does with his food when he's off the trail. Okay, there's a sidebar in there called Skirkus Picks Food Protection on that page, and he also put the same material in an Outside Online article that got published in February. And he's talking in there about bear bagging versus bear canisters and other ways to protect your food. And he goes through a lot of stuff in the article as well. But it seemed like social media picked up on this one little paragraph that was in there where he says, depending on your local risks, you may consider sleeping with your food, okay? And he admits that people practice this, but no one's necessarily willing to talk about it. Now, I don't agree with that recommendation, and a lot of other people don't either. And he got a lot of blowback for publishing that online in social media. You do have to put it in a bit of context, though. If you look at where he hikes, he's not typically hiking on hiker highways like the John Muir Trail or a popular trail like Pictured Rocks where you're staying at designated sites, okay? If you look back at the slide that I talked about what he does and where he hikes, a lot of his hikes are far away from the established hiking trails out there in the wilderness where bears aren't a big problem. And he's specifically saying in those areas where bears aren't a problem and where he doesn't feel like he's at risk, he may sleep with his food. And that's his choice. That wouldn't be mine. I'd probably still use a bear canister. And he does recommend using a bear canister and or whatever other food protection method the land manager of the public land he's on recommends. But people did tend to focus on that. So I did want to bring that up a little bit, and at least mention it so that you folks don't run into that on the page and then go, what the heck is this all about? And start asking questions. The other book that I wanted to mention, even though we're not giving it out, this is the book that I used in the 2014 class by Mike Cleland. This book was published in 2011. It hasn't seen any updates since, and I do like the book from the point of view that it's a very approachable book. Mike Cleland uses a very casual style of writing. There's a lot of cartoons in his book that are really neat to look at and sort of get across a lot of his points. I picked Andy Skirka's book instead of this book for this class because A, Andy's book is more up to date and covers some things that Mike's doesn't. And B, Mike Cleland, his book is skewed a little bit toward the mountains out in the western US. And so there are some recommendations he has in there that aren't as applicable to those of us in the Midwest who hike in heavily forested areas where mosquitoes can be a problem and where sometimes it's a lot wetter here or places, along the Appalachian Trail or the Northeast than it is out in California or, sometimes up in Montana. So if you've got the money, though, I think it's definitely worth purchasing this book and looking through it, too. You'd get a lot out of it in addition to what you'd get out of Andy Skirka's book. So be aware of that book. You may see that I've borrowed a couple of his cartoons for some of my slides as well. So I did do that. You'd probably pick him up because you can tell his drawing style. Just sort of speaking about the fact that, I understand why he writes and targets toward the Western United States. If you look at a map of public lands, the vast majority of it is out there, and that's also where he's based. So it kind of explains why his book is geared more toward hikers out in the West. But like I said, there are things like hammocks that he doesn't even talk about that Andy Skirka does. And I know hammock camping has become like a big popular thing here in the Midwest and, out along the Appalachian Trail and stuff. So why go light? I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to convince you why you should go light. Obviously, you've decided to take this class, so you're interested in the topic. But basically for me, heavy packs suck. I've carried a 60-pound pack up Mount Rainier, so has Tim. We know that's not an easy thing to do. And, if you can go light, I think, and still be safe, lighter's better. It's much easier to walk into camp at the end of the day and not feel tired and exhausted and just want to throw your pack on the ground and throw yourself on the ground at the same time, trying to take a break before setting up camp. For some people, it could also be physical limitations. My wife, for example, has a bad back. She's had a double spinal fusion after a back injury. And so her doctors had told her she shouldn't carry more than 25 pounds regardless. And so that has also encouraged us, motivated us to lighten our packs as much as we can. Some people also want to go lighter because they want to do more miles. Maybe you're inspired by some of the big thru hiker presentations that Solar has brought in the last couple of years, whether it's Heather Anderson or Chris Hillier. And you don't see Heather Anderson talking about carrying a 45-pound pack down the trail. She's going extremely light when she hikes. And generally speaking, a lighter pack can lead to fewer injuries and blisters. And I want to back that up with a little bit of data. So Chris Ann and I hiked 92 miles of the John Muir Trail in 2017, and we're getting ready to do about 120 miles of it this year again. And one of the things I found when doing my research is there's a couple people who do a survey every year of hikers on the trail. And they ask you, and I took part in the survey when we did the hike in 2017, they ask you a lot of questions like, what part of the trail did you go on? How much did your pack weigh? Where did you resupply? How many miles a day did you go? What sort of gear problems did you have? What sort of medical issues did you have? So they ask a lot of questions. And then they tried to compile some reports, sort of bring all that information from those surveys together into some meaningful data. And they generally get about 1,500 people responding to the surveys. And then they've tried to correlate some of the data. And one of the correlations they were making was based on the base weight of your backpack, what sort of medical issues or other issues were people having on the trail. And they saw a fairly good correlation between pack weight and things like shoulder strap pain, having enough room to fit all your food in your pack, because you can go for quite some miles on some parts of the John Muir Trail without resupply. Back pain, fall tripping and trauma, gear failures, foot blisters, as well as knee and ankle issues. So, statistics can be a tricky thing, and, correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, but, it does suggest that lowering your pack weight can help reduce incidences of these types of problems when you're on the trail. And there's a similar set of correlations they drew with lighter footwear, same sorts of issues, right? Where lighter footwear can lead to less occurrences of these types of problems. But what was interesting was the lighter the footwear went, it seemed like the higher number of issues people had with fall, tripping, or trauma. And that one was curious. And they kind of noted in the report that this reverse correlation on footwear weight. And they're not sure why that is. They're not sure if there are people with heavy packs who are trying to wear lightweight shoes with heavy packs, and they're, suffering falls because their footwear isn't appropriate for their pack weight. They also wondered if maybe it was the early season hikers who were hitting the John Muir Trail, running trail runners, and these folks were encountering snow-covered mountain passes, and they weren't really prepared for that, wearing trail runners, that maybe it was those folks who were having problems because they would, slip and fall on snow, on a mountain pass, and have problems because of that. So I did want to call that out, just for honesty, that, hey, there were some problems that some JMT hikers reported when they went super light with their footwear, and had some slip and fall problems on the John Muir Trail, which is a trail that can have, some significant snow up on the mountain passes early in the season. But back to like the lighter pack weight and things, here's, another a good example of why I would want a lighter pack. This is back in the Wind River Range. I've been in the Wind River Range a couple times. Chris Ann's been there 3 times now. We haven't been over this particular pass, but this is one of those off-trail routes. And this is a picture of one of the big backpacking bloggers out there, Adventure Allen, he calls himself, a descending knapsack call. And as you can see, this is a mountain pass that's very rugged. It's got a lot of loose, what's called, talus or scree, and he's coming down that pass. And that's not the kind of place that you would want to be with a 50-pound pack, right? If you're going to go, especially off trail, and do some of these more challenging type hikes that folks are doing up in the mountains, it's probably not the kind of place where you would want to be with a heavy pack. And so it's another good reason to look at your pack and think about, how can I safely go lighter? So categorizing light, if you want to categorize it, these are the official numbers that people will apply to different categories of lightweight packs. And when you look at the numbers, they're talking about base weight. And that is the weight of all the gear that you're carrying in your pack minus your consumables. Your consumables is your food, your fuel, and your water. So you can see, less than 20 pounds is lightweight, less than 10 pounds is ultralight, less than 5 is super ultralight. I think these numbers are fairly arbitrary. Somebody at some point in the past came up with these numbers, and I don't worry about them personally, but here they are. And another point, though, is 10 pounds to someone like me means something different than carrying 10 pounds to someone like Alex. Alex's wife, Sarah, who's probably half my weight, right? So whereas I may not notice 10-pound base weight on my backpack, she would, because it's a much higher percentage of her overall body weight. And so again, lightweight means something different to different people depending on who you are and how strong you are. If you're a 25-year-old ex-Marine, you could carry 40 pounds and probably not break a sweat doing it. But for most of us weekend warriors, it's probably a bigger deal. So I wouldn't, focus too much on the numbers. If you're, looking at going lighter, don't worry about what category you fall in as much as, am I reaching my own personal goals about losing some of my pack weight so that my pack is more comfortable at the end of the day? Any questions so far?
No. No.
Hey, Jeff, this is Bhargava. I got a question. So this, the way to think of lightweight packing, do you consider the clothes you're wearing, things like that? Like, you mentioned about the light footwear.
Yeah.
Is it more like a boot versus a shoe, or is there more further detail around that?
So there is a separate category called worn weight, which is the things that you wear that aren't in your pack. And there's some debate about that too, because, there are people who will do things like you buy pants with big cargo pockets and then stuff the cargo pockets full of gear and say, well, that's worn weight, not pack weight, or, whatever. I think that's like, hey, whatever, if that's what you want to do and you feel more comfortable carrying your gear that way, that's up to you. But generally speaking, footwear isn't counted against your pack weight, but they're usually things that go hand in hand, right? Someone who's looking to lighten their pack, generally speaking, is also looking to move away from full height all leather boots, because full height all leather boots tend to be heavy. And I think even the United States Army did a study some years ago, and they showed that a pound of weight on your feet is worth 6 pounds on your back. And so, there's a big gain for, shaving a little bit of weight off your boots. And some people really like trail runners. Some of us will hike in a light but mid-height hiking boot that's still really meshy and light, but not, quite as weight as a trail runner. Again, some of that comes down to your preference, where you're going, how light your pack is. Those are all factors that I would use when I think about what kind of footwear I'm going to put on my feet when I go hiking. So some myths and truths about lightweight backpacking.
Are we going to get PowerPoint?
What's that?
Are we going to receive this PowerPoint?
I can send you a copy if you want one.
Thank you.
Is lightweight backpacking a modern fad? Not really. This is a copy of a cover of Backpacker magazine from 1982. So this is coming up on 40 years now that they've been talking about lightweight, and it's pretty funny because you go and you look at how sometimes the category of lightweight gear is used. Someone had talked about how, I forget if it was Osprey or Gregory, had called one of their 5.5 pound packs a lightweight pack, and sort of the joke was, well, gee, if that was their lightweight pack, what was their heavyweight pack? I mean, how much did that thing weigh? But the point is, lightening up your backpack has been a holy grail probably for, almost as long as backpacking has existed, right? I mean, who wants to carry 60 pounds of gear down the trail if you don't have to? Does lightweight backpacking mean you'll be cold and hungry? This is my 6-year-old grandson, by the way. We were up near Hoist Lakes 2 years ago in the fall. He really wasn't. He was cold when we first woke up that morning because it was a cold morning, but as soon as I wrapped my sleeping quilt around him, he was fine. He wasn't cold. And if you do it right, you shouldn't be cold or hungry when you're backpacking, even if you're going light. If you are, it just means you didn't bring enough gear and you made a mistake. So I don't ever feel like I'm starving or cold out there unless I've, brought the wrong gear for the conditions. And again, I try to spend a lot of time studying the weather forecasts and things to understand, what are the conditions that we're going to be going in when we hit the trail. So, when that comes down to, choosing your gear, practicing close to home. Someone had mentioned in the survey that they had a hard time doing weekend trips locally because it was a lot of effort versus what they got out of it. And I totally get that. Once you get ruined by hiking in those big mountains, especially out west, you look at, hiking along, a lot of the trails here in Michigan, you're like, wow, Jordan River Pathway or Manistee River Trail. Yeah, they're interesting, but they're nothing like, standing on a mountain pass at 11,000 feet above tree line, looking at the High Sierra Mountains. At the same time, though, it's an opportunity to practice skills. And especially when you're looking at getting some newer gear, some new lightweight gear maybe, or any kind of backpack gear for that matter, where you haven't had a lot of opportunity to use it, the weekend trips are an opportunity to get out and use your gear in all sorts of conditions and understand where are you comfortable with that gear and where maybe aren't you. And I mentioned, you still have to spend more time studying the climate and weather for where you're going on your trip. That's really important. So you pick the right gear. And based on the information about where you're going, you've got a toolbox of gear that you'll pull from and pick what's appropriate for that trip. I don't think there's like a silver bullet piece of gear that fits every situation that you may go hiking in. If you're going to go to the Pacific Northwest, for example, which is a very wet place to go, generally speaking, I would probably pick different gear than if I'm going hiking in California in the High Sierra, which sees very little rain, in an average month of August in the summertime. So there's a list of, a range of gear that I would have to pull from depending on where I'm going to go. Does going lightweight mean spending more money? Well, it can. There are certainly tents out there, and I'm going to share some different lists of gear on Saturday so you can sort of comparison shop on paper. There are some tents that are extremely expensive, and this $535, that is not the most expensive tent out there. Big Agnes actually has a couple tents out there this year that are like close to $1,000. And so that's, there can be pieces of gear that are very expensive out there if you really want to go all the way to the edge of having the lightest gear possible. But you don't have to. There are other tents that are much more affordable, in the $200 range. It all depends on what you're looking for. Another example I like to bring up is, here's an example of a brand name stove that costs quite a bit of money, but you can actually go lighter and go cheaper at the same time. So it really depends on how you shop. And sometimes the lighter options can save you money. And that's because some of these big name brands like Jetboil charge a premium because they have brand name recognition in the market, right? So there is a lot of truth to the fact that some lightweight gear is expensive, but it doesn't have to be. And the cat food can stoves is another example, right? We can make a cat food can stove for $1, and it's very light, and you can cook meals on it, and be happy doing that, and not have to spend $100 on the stove if you don't want to. This is another example. You'll see shelter setups like this out west a lot more, I think, than here, especially like very early in the season or later in the season, when there aren't mosquito problems and when they don't get a lot of precipitation. And so up in the mountains, you can go with a a shaped tarp-like shelter like this and be dry and protected from the wind and stuff, and not spend a lot of money, like $500, $600, on a fully double-walled tent that has a full mesh netting and stuff. That's not a style that everybody likes. I know some people don't like the idea of little critters crawling along the ground and visiting them in the middle of the night, but it is a popular style in some areas. So I like to bring this up, along with the spending the money. If you are going to get gear, another point though is, and I've seen this with people I know, right, where they will make an impulse buy on gear, and then they're not happy with that gear, and then they go and they buy more gear. And so it's not necessarily that they're spending more money on lightweight gear because the lightweight gear is more expensive, but just that maybe they didn't research their gear well when they made their initial purchase, or maybe they bought cheap and heavy gear to begin with, and now they're like, well, gee, that gear is really heavy. It really didn't work as well for me as I thought because I was really new to backpacking when I purchased it. And now what am I going to do? I got to go buy a whole new set of gear again. I think to some extent that's where being a member of Solar has an advantage, right? Because you can borrow gear for free, learn what you like to use and what your sort of style of hiking is before you're ready to make a purchase. On top of that, when you are ready to purchase, wait for the sales, use the coupons. For those of you who missed it, Moose Jaw gives Solar members a 15% discount. I'm also a member of the American Alpine Club, which is pretty geared toward like mountain climbers and rock climbers, but you don't have to be. There's backpackers in the club too. And they've got some great discounts from a couple of the brands out there like Big Agnes and Outdoor Research. And so, if that's something that interests you, let me know. I'm not supposed to like publicly say like, what the discounts are from some of these brands. It's part of our, membership agreement that we can't like widely publicize those sorts of things. There's also browser tools out there that will help you find discounts or apply coupons when you're checking out at some of the big online retailers. I use one called WikiBuy. I think there's a couple others out there too, and they're kind of neat because when you go to your shopping cart and you're ready to check out, you just click this button and it tries to apply all these coupon codes that it knows about to see if it can give you a little extra discount. There's always buying used. There's different forums out there who have used gear for sale. Or you can make some of your own gear, like the alcohol stove that we're going to talk about. And I'll also show you on Saturday some of the lightweight quilts that I've made on my own and that I have taken on trips. Does lightweight mean ignoring leave no trace? Nope. I'm a certified leave no trace instructor. I really believe in it. And the idea, you still have to leave behind a pristine wilderness environment, even if you're trying to go light, fast, or long. And I think if you talk to any, seasoned hiker, they'll all agree that you still have to practice wilderness ethics when you're out there. Does lightweight backpacking mean taking risks? This is a picture from our 2017 John Muir Trail trip. We were coming over Goodale Pass, which is the first mountain pass that we came over, and there was a bit of snow at the top. But we had done quite a bit of research going into that trip, trying to understand how much snow we would be looking at during the section of the trail we were going on during the time of year we were going to be there. And we're looking at a chart like this. Now, this chart is from this year. And the brown line was the 2016-2017 year, and it shows the amount of snow that was on the ground in the High Sierra. Okay. The big light blue hump, that's an average year in California in the High Sierra. So you can see that when we were there in 2017, there was a lot more snow on the John Muir Trail. And it's shaping up to be exactly the same this year. So the blue line that's only half drawn. That's as of, what is that, March 28th of this year, showing how much snow is up in the High Sierra this year. And I was closely tracking this and reading reports from the PCT hikers, because they're the first ones to go typically through the JMT early in the year as they hike north. And we were following those reports to see what are the passes like that we're going to be on. Are they dangerous? Do we need to worry about, steep, slippery snow conditions on the mountain passes we're going to be going over? And, were we going to have to carry something like a hiking crampon, or maybe something less, like spikes, the red spikes that you slip over your boots? And it turned out, the year we were there, the answer was no. The pass that we went over, lots of hikers went over that pass successfully. They didn't, by August when we were there. And they didn't need extra gear. Yes, there was a little bit of snow up at the top, but it was well consolidated. And we were able to sort of cut that diagonal path and get onto some rock, and we were fine. And so the point there is you got to do your research, right? And if they do call for dangerous conditions when you're going to go, then you still have to take the gear. You can't just say, well, I'm going to go lightweight and I'm not going to take gear. I'm going to take some crazy risks being out there. That's a terrible idea. That's not the point of lightweight backpacking. Take the gear that you need to take to be safe. We did, and we continue to do that. There's a couple adages, though, about preparedness that I like to talk about. One that's thrown out a lot is this idea that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right? And the saying sort of implies that extra gear is somehow going to always make you safer. And some extra gear, sure, there are cases where going really extreme with what you use for a shelter or a sleeping bag or whatever may put you at risk. But it doesn't mean that just piling on 50 pounds of gear is somehow going to make you safer out on the trail. And sort of make that point, there were a couple big accidents that happened along the PCT in 2017. And I went and kind of looked at some of those. There was a heat-related issue that one guy had. There was some fallen steep snow at one of the much bigger passes on the southern end of the JMT. There was a guy who got caught in an avalanche. There were several people who were swept downstream fording high water creeks along the trail. And then there were people like toward the end of their hike who were out there late in the season, and they got caught in really heavy snow up in Washington State. And they had to get rescued out because the snow became much too deep for them to deal with. But when you look at that list, there's only one or two of those where you could argue that having more gear would have really helped them, right? The guy who had heat-related injury, he could have carried more water. And then maybe he would have avoided, the heat issues that he had suffered from. And you could probably argue that maybe the folks who were falling up on the mountain passes, had they have mountaineering gear, they would have been safer up there with that. But you could also argue maybe they shouldn't have been up there to begin with if there was that much snow and the trail was that steep and dangerous at that time of year. There's a lot of PCT hikers who, in a heavy snow year like 2017 was, they'll hike up from the Mexican border toward the JMT section, and then they'll skip the High Sierra altogether. They'll leap forward and hike Northern California and into Oregon and Washington State, and then they'll come back toward the end of the year to finish hiking the section of the PCT that's also the John Muir Trail, when the snow has all melted out and there's no longer issues being up on those mountain passes. So you could argue that it's not so much about having the gear as making good decisions about being out there. And the same thing with fording high water. What kind of gear are you going to carry that's going to allow you to safely cross a swiftly moving creek that's chest high? I can't really think of any. I'm not going to go out there like Bear Grylls and have a big rope and a grappling hook and try to throw this hook across the river, right? and pull myself across. That's just not practical. It's smarter to maybe wait for morning when water levels drop, because water levels are closely tied to snow melt. And so if you try to cross a creek in the first thing in the morning, water levels are much lower than they are at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Or maybe you hike upstream or downstream and you find a place where the creek is wider and flatter and shallower and therefore safer. That would be a much better idea and has nothing to do with carrying extra gear. And avalanches, the best thing to do is don't get caught in high avalanche risk areas, on snow. There's no good gear that's really going to keep you from avoiding an avalanche, right? There are things you can carry that may help you once an avalanche happens to get dug out if you're with a group. But if you're out there alone, what are you going to do? Who's going to dig you out of that avalanche? So, my point being, carrying extra gear doesn't necessarily make you safer in all situations. Another adage that people put out is be prepared, which is the Scouts motto. But the reality is that the guy who used the slogan "Be prepared," the founder of the Boy Scout movement, really meant be prepared in mind by disciplining yourself to be obedient to every order and having thought out beforehand the situations that might occur so that you know the right thing to do. And to be prepared in body by making yourself strong and active and able to do the right thing. Okay? A lot of people think be prepared means being equipped, and they're not the same thing. So I think people sometimes incorrectly attribute the Scouts motto as, I should carry all this extra gear, whatever that means, because I'm following the Scouts motto of being prepared. And I think they're misinterpreting what the original intent of that motto was by the founder of the Boy Scouts. So,
hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Bargo again. So, can you give like a couple of examples of your thought process around what is an extra gear that you would take and in what kind of conditions? Like, I'm trying to visualize some examples of what that would look like. You mentioned like snow, and so it's basically, as an example, is like those metal clippers that you have under the boots.
Yeah.
Is that a extra gear that you can think of as one of the examples?
Yeah, if I had decided that people, I was going to go hike this route, and people said, well, look, if you're going to go in July, there's really steep snow up there, and if you're really going to go over that mountain pass, you need to have the gear and the training to use that gear, not just having the gear, right? You have to know how to use it. I've been through a mountaineering class. Tim Davis has. I don't know if anyone else who's in the class this year has, but whatever. So we have a background on how to do self-arrest with an ice axe, right? And how to walk with crampons. But just the fact that you have them, there's a lot of people talking this year. I see them on the forums all the time right now. They're talking, hey, I've got my permit to hike the John Muir Trail. I'm going out the last week in June, and there's going to be a ton of snow on the JMT the last week in June this year. And so even if they say, I'm going to go buy an ice axe or I'm going to buy crampons, do you know how to use it? Do you know how to self-arrest if you start sliding uncontrollably down the snow? For some of those hikers, the answer is no, they don't. But for those of us, maybe that's a legitimate piece of gear that I would carry if I know how to use it and I'm going to go out at that time of year, right?
Right.
Okay. But there are other pieces of gear that maybe I wouldn't carry. Like, why would I carry a hand axe if for most of the trail in California, fire or open wood fires aren't allowed because of the constant problem of forest fire danger they have out there, right? So a lot of what lightweight backpacking is about building up your skills so that you don't necessarily need all the extra gear to help you feel safe. And taking classes is certainly how you build those skills. Getting out and practicing is the same way. And, thinking carefully about what gear do you need and what gear don't you. And, one example I like to use, think about a friend of mine, he was camping at a state park. So it's kind of a silly example, but it kind of makes the point. He was camping at a state park. So he didn't really have the ability to choose where he pitched his tent. He had to pitch his tent in the site that he was given. And so he pitched a standard, heavy REI tent with a full bath floor and stuff. And it was a good thing he did, because his particular site was in a shallow depression. The ground's been stomped down, and it's, at the bottom of a little bit of a hill. And they got like a big storm came through Michigan and totally drenched, the entire area. And he said he literally had like a river flowing under his tent during the storm, right? And think, in that point, as a beginner, that happens a lot, where people will pitch their tent without thinking about, well, where am I pitching my tent? I'm not real good at picking a good campsite, so I'm going to pitch it just, wherever it looks like other people have pitched my tent. And if it rains, I've got this great REI tent that's got a bathtub floor. And if there's an inch of water under my tent, it's okay, because I've got this tent and it's really waterproof and it's going to keep me safe. A lot of lightweight folks will use a tarp or some sort of a tent that's much lighter and doesn't have a bathtub floor. But they do that because they're very mindful of where they decide to camp, right? They're looking at maps, and even when they get to where they think they're going to camp, they may spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe up to an hour finding just the right site where, water's not going to flow under where they're camped if it rains, and maybe they've got some tree cover overhead so their campsite's a little warmer and protected from, an open starry sky at night and that sort of thing. And those are the sorts of examples of using your skills that you gain over time to replace just carrying heavy gear because you were a beginner and you didn't know better. Okay?
Yep.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
You had that one graph there showing the snow depths of the JMT, I think.
Yeah.
Are you going to go into more detail? I know because Andrew Skirka talked about it in the first part of his book about, are there like certain places, where did you get that chart from? And, are there links or sources that we can go to get that kind of information?
Yeah, sometimes people are posting those to some of the groups I follow online. Like there's a couple pages on Facebook which are like JMT hiker pages, but I'll try to find it again because some of them are easy to find the charts and others are pretty lousy, right? Where it's just these raw tables of data from these gauging stations up in the mountains, and you sort of have to take all the data and plot it yourself. So I can find the one site that I was looking at where they did a good job of drawing those graphs, because they're not necessarily easy to find. I think even CalTopo, I think they might even have I have to go look again, a layer where they show the snow depth gauges that are being reported at the sites that are available, because those are all pulled from some government site somewhere, and kind of aggregates that stuff. So yeah, it's not necessarily clear. Like if I wanted to go to Wyoming, okay, where do I go to find the snow depths in Wyoming, right? Yeah. And the JMT is nice, I think, because it's so popular that there's a lot of interest, and so there's a lot of people out there like gathering that information and making it available online. Yeah. So yeah, I'll see if I can look around and see if I can find the original source for that plot.
Okay.
Yeah. So once you decide to go lighter, one of the things you got to do is you got to make a gear list, right? It doesn't do you a lot of good just to throw your gear in a pile and go, well, that looks like it's about right for 3 weeks in the woods, and throw it in your pack and go. That's how we end up with pretty heavy packs. It's tedious, but making a gear list is really important. It gives you the ability to then look at that list objectively and look at the weight of everything and identify, wow, where's all my weight coming from? And to do that, you've got to weigh everything, right? So having a kitchen scale and maybe even a luggage scale is pretty key to making all this work. For some gear, you can go online and find the manufacturer specs, but they're not always all that accurate, right? If you go look at the specs for a tent, sometimes they'll give you 2 or 3 different weights for the tent. There's like the minimum weight, the trail weight, the package weight. Well, which one am I supposed to use? Just, they can be kind of misleading. So you're much better off weighing all your gear and documenting your own gear. Also, never say it's only a couple of ounces, right? You say, oh, I'm just going to throw that in. It's a couple of ounces. What's the big deal? Well, ounces add up to pounds surprisingly fast. So, you really do want to be anal retentive and, really measure every piece of gear and account for it on your gear list. Lightweight backpacking can get pretty technical, and we'll get a little more technical on the next presentation and the following Wednesday presentation. And I get a little technical on Saturday too, where when we talk about picking a camping site, we'll be talking about weather and how physics affects weather and condensation, and human physiology comes into, well, why do you feel cold at night? And the chemistry part of it is things like, well, how does evaporation make you cold? And even a little bit of, how does different foods, there's a little bit of chemistry there. There's also a lot of really high-tech materials and fancy marketing names out there, right? And I've got a little bit of a glossary. Andy Skirka, I think, has a glossary in the back of his book too. And I've got my own little handout of a glossary of terms for some of the different fabrics that you're going to run out into. And then they talk about tents made of this versus that, or my rain jacket is made of this material versus that material. That can all get really confusing. And so it can be tough to look at all these different tents that are made of these different materials and try to make an apples to apples comparison and understand, well, what are the pros versus cons of a tent made with this material versus a tent made with that material, or a rain jacket that's made with this fabric versus that fabric. If you've started reading the book, you'll also see that there's a lot of tables and spreadsheets in there. And I'll probably give you several more on Saturday as well. I've got several different lists of tents and sleeping bags and stoves and pots and things. And the idea is you can then look at this list and say, wow, there's a lot of range and variability in there. What sleeping bag is right for me? You're looking at the weight, you're looking at the temperature rating of the bag, and trying to figure out what's the sweet spot for what I want to buy, so that you can make an informed decision and purchase an item and try to feel relatively confident that it's going to be the right piece of gear for you. And I know it can be overwhelming, and sometimes we can suffer from what they call analysis paralysis, right? Where you get just overwhelmed with all this data. You just got to try to take it a little bit at a time, I guess, is the best advice I can give you there. We're not going to get into a lot of specifics today, but you're going to figure out pretty soon that most of your pack weight is in a couple big areas. Your sleep system is one. Your shelter obviously is another, right? There's huge differences in weights between one tent versus another, or maybe a tent versus a tarp. There can be a big difference in weights for cooking systems too. And then your packing system, which is your backpack and whatever else you're using to carry your gear, is the other. As I mentioned earlier, your backpack is probably the last thing you're going to want to focus on, just because if you were to buy a lightweight pack first, you would then take this lightweight pack and put all your heavy gear into it, and you would be really unhappy. So, the general recommendation is focus on lightening the rest of your gear before you go out and shop for a lightweight pack. That should be one of the last things you do, because, you'll still be really happy if your gear weighs, 20 pounds and you're putting it to a pack that can carry 50, right? That'll probably carry it extremely well, and you'll still feel really good about that. There are some things that can be stupid light, and this kind of goes back to the taking risks part of the discussion. And this is a phrase that Andy Skurka coined. I'm not sure if he mentions it in his book, but he's got a big article about it online, and I sent a link out to that article earlier today. And the idea is, stupid light is the idea that you're so focused on that number that you've taken it too far, and you've made your gear so light that you're now risking your safety when you go out in the woods or, on the trail. And you're picking gear that lacks some functionality or reliability or even time effectiveness just because you're counting ounces a little too much. Okay. And so stupid light, the point is light is not always right or not always better. And there's a couple examples I throw in here. Andy Skurka's got a lot more in his article, and he explains the reason why he's categorized some of those items the way he did. But the ones that I like to bring up here is using a keychain light instead of a headlamp. The weird thing is, I'm pretty sure in the blue book, the Mike Clelland book that I mentioned earlier, he recommends using a keychain light clipped to the brim of your hat. And Andy Skurka doesn't agree with that. And his argument is, if you're out at night, and there's a pretty good chance that as a hiker, you might go out at night to use the bathroom, or maybe you get into camp a little bit later than you expected. That's not terribly uncommon. And so the argument is a teeny tiny little keychain light might be okay for finding your gloves when you're in your tent. But when you step outside and you're wandering through the woods, it's a terrible light to have outside. And, spend a little more in terms of weight to get a legitimate headlamp that can throw a good beam of light out on the trail. Another one is this idea of having this poncho that becomes the tarp that you sleep under at night. And this is an interesting one, and there's a couple makers out there who sell these. And I can't help but wonder, what happens when you wander into camp for the evening and it's raining. So you're wearing the poncho trying to stay dry. Well, now this poncho has to become your shelter. So what are you going to do? You're going to take the poncho off, and you're going to get soaking wet in the process of turning it into your shelter and crawling under it, right? So I wouldn't agree with, going that lightweight and saying, oh, my shelter is also my rain jacket, and I've saved a lot of weight doing that. I think that's a bad idea. The other one that Andy Skurka mentions, and I agree with this, again, it's one that Mike Clelland in the Blue Book kind of recommends. He says, hey, you can use your tent stakes to support your pot over your little lightweight alcohol stove. And I guess that would work if you were never cooking and eating at the same time you were camping, had your shelter up. But, a lot of us, we make camp, and
that makes no sense.
Yeah, I know. And the same thing with some people are like, oh, use your tent stake as your trowel to dig your cat hole. And I'm sorry, but, 8-inch Y stake is not going to dig my cat hole adequately. It's just not going to happen. There are lightweight, little tiny, lightweight spades out there you can use to dig your cat hole, and they don't weigh that much. And use that instead of a tent stake. I just think you're wasting your time doing that. But this is, again, one where Mike Clelland recommended, like, hey, this is multi-use. And I'm like, I don't agree with that. I think that's silly. It's not necessarily going to put you at risk or be a safety issue, but it's like, why would you do that, right? You just you're counting the grams a little too much, and you're sacrificing usability. Like, it'll take you like an hour to get that hole dug. So I don't recommend doing that. And so I recommend, there's a lot more on his list. If you want to go and read the article, it's definitely worth reading. That's about all I've got for tonight. That was what time is it here? 9 o'clock. That was a good solid hour and 15. I hope I didn't bore you guys to death with this.
Not at all. Not at all.
Any questions on what we talked about tonight?
I got a question for you, Jeff. I guess it's the practical, and you have, I guess you sent out a little earlier, a list of loaner gear.
Yeah.
And so this is solar gear, and this is all lightweight. Oh, okay, I see it. It says some of it's yours and some of it's
yeah. Some of it's mine and some of it's solar stuff. I didn't check out like all the general stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my assumption is, you know, for the regular, I wanted to feature just the lightweight gear. And if people didn't have their own quote unquote heavier gear, then they could arrange to loan that stuff from the equipment chair themselves.
Okay. So you're suggesting, so for the practical, we want to swap out our heavy gear for some of this then.
If you can, yeah. You know, okay. I would certainly like to see people trying some of that stuff. I think it would be pretty cool to see people playing with some of the alcohol stoves and stuff, even if down the road you decide it's not for you, at least get some exposure to it. A lot of those, especially those Foster beer can pots, those are definitely like solo stoves. You know, where weight is definitely the focus of those little pots more than, you know, the time it takes to boil the water, right? Because canister stove, you can boil water, like 2 cups of water in 3 minutes flat.
Yep.
An alcohol stove, it will take you 5-6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to use one of those to boil like, you know, 2 quarts of water at a time. You'll never get it done. You'd be out there. Right. So if you're the kind of person who maybe you're hiking the Appalachian Trail and you do a pretty simple breakfast and dinner, you know, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but a lightweight alcohol stove might be a really good choice. If you're in a group and you're doing like coffee for breakfast and, you know, plus breakfast, and you're doing, you know, hot chocolate and dinner every night for like 3 people, you know, one dinky little alcohol stove wouldn't be a good choice for that type of scenario.
No.
And I think, you know, Jen Teslarix, I know she and Audie are big alcohol stove users too. And I think maybe she could even chime in on some of her experiences using those on Saturday when we're playing with them.
I'll bring some.
Cool.
On Saturday, should we or could we, I don't know if you'd want like some of our gear that we have right now that you can comment on?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We can look over some of your gear and give you our thoughts on it. One of the things that Alex is scheduled to do is he's going to bring his pack like he took it on his last High Sierra trip. And he's going to show you like everything that he carried on that trip. And I know we're going to go through a little bit of Alex, are you still online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Do we want to bring up that webpage? Let me do that.
Yeah, well, why don't you, if you just make me the presenter, I can show it. I have it up, I think.
Okay. There's 2 of you.
Let's see. One of them may say computer. Let me see which one.
Yeah. I was waiting to view your screen.
All right. I think it's.
Yep, I see it.
Okay. Can you guys see my? You guys can see my lighter pack.
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can.
Yes.
All right. So this is a website that Jeff linked you guys to. So basically, what we do before every trip, Sarah and I, is
we'll go through and I'll walk you through some of these major things on the website. But when you open it and you create an account for free, it doesn't cost anything. It'll be completely blank, and you can start to name, your categories. Like you can see that, I have the big three, which is my pack. For me, the big three: my pack, my quilt, my sleeping pad. The tent is further down, but you can see this is for a trip we did this summer. It was 7 days on the trail without resupply, and we had to use bear canisters. So this is in the High Sierra. Temperatures ranging from 90 degrees to 35 at night. So severe elevation change. So we had to prepare for quite a bit of variation in weather. And again, Jeff mentioned he mentioned different reasons for going ultralight. In our case, it was both higher miles, so targeting 15, 20-mile days, easier. But also there were days on this trip where maybe it was only 13, 15-mile day, but we were done before lunch, right? So that was kind of our benefit of going this light, was we could move pretty quickly without much fatigue. So so if you go through the website, and again, you have to weigh literally everything you're going to take, right? So there were a lot of decisions made, a lot of things where, I didn't think it was necessarily worth it for this trip. So I took it off this lighter pack. So, you can really start to see that as you get into things like clothes, right? So you can start to, so in my case, I knew we were moving pretty quickly, and I knew that the chance of rain in the High Sierra is pretty low in August when we were going. So I made some decisions on gear. Like I didn't take rain pants because I knew that I'm not a big fan of rain pants when I'm hiking. I still feel like I get pretty wet, so I kept them out. Also, pants in general, I knew it was going to be pretty warm, so I hike in pretty shorty running shorts and bring pretty light tights if it gets cold, right? So I can put on some running tights and some weight there. So as you go down, there's some things you can do on this website, right? So mark things like I did here as worn clothes. So I was wearing my shorts, I was wearing socks, shirt, etc. So then you'll see that counted up here as worn weight. And then you can do things like you can measure consumables. So one big thing that we'll get into in this class, and again, this is just an overview of the website, but we'll teach you ways to go lighter on your food. So in our case, we had 7 days worth of food, and it actually came in at just under 7 pounds total. So you're looking at under a pound a day. So there's some things we did to get really light on our food. We eat a low carb diet, so that certainly helps. And we didn't bring a stove, so everything was cold and cold soaked, and just eating at room temperature. So you can see some weight savings there. So kind of going back, and also I do some photography, so there's some extra weight there. But you guys hopefully can kind of see how this works, right? So this is all the stuff that I'm going to bring to the practical, like Jeff said. But you can start to get a breakdown for, okay, the total weight on my back was just under 27 pounds. Consumables, which means food, and this includes 2 liters of water, which we can talk more about in the class. But, some trips like this one, we really didn't need 2 liters of water because we crossed water, it seemed like every 45 minutes. So you can, track consumables and manage that as best you can. And then you'll get, obviously, your worn weight and your base weight. So, this is just a template, or this is just what we did, I guess. And I can share this with you guys if you want to look. But you can start to see how different trips will make different pieces of equipment necessary, right? Like, for somebody that's relatively ultra light like myself, carrying a bear canister, like I hate doing that, right? 3 pounds, which is, almost 30% of my typical base weight, right? So you have to make those decisions sometimes. Maybe leave behind other pieces of gear that are not necessary, like a chair, right? Like I know a lot of you may like to bring a chair. For me, I'm not going to bring one if I'm bringing a bear canister because it's already 3 pounds and I can sit on it, right? So this is kind of the idea of the website, is give you a visual for how your gear breaks down, and also, let you make decisions like, maybe I say, hey, it's going to be pretty warm in this year, so I'm not going to bring my fleece. So all I do is mark my quantity at 0, and I look back up at my clothing, and you'll see that my weight went down, right? So does anybody have any questions on the website while I'm on it, or you just want to play with it yourself? It's pretty self-explanatory once you kind of get into it.
So Alex, you can create different events, or like keep your trips separate, where you can compare trip to trip what you used or didn't use, but using all the same base information that's already in there.
Yeah, exactly. So you can start to see that I have, if I was smart, well, I guess it does it for me, but you can see that I have my basic gear just kind of in a drop-down list. So if I'm going to start doing, a new list, let's see if it works. Yeah. So I can throw in my running shorts. Do what work? Add a new item. I'm sure there's a way you can just. Oh yeah, there you go. Drag and drop it in. Now my shorts are in there. Or my jet boil, right? So when we went to Pictured Rocks in October at the beginning class, we knew it wasn't really high miles, and we knew it was going to be freezing, so we brought our jet boil, right? So this is kind of the way you can start to build your list, right? And you can create different categories to make it easier, like I did on my other list. But
Thanks.
Pretty cool website. So you basically you have an inventory of your items with weight and all that, and then you just pick and choose for a different. You're going.
yeah, exactly, and that'll help when you're somebody like Jeff that has a big gear closet, right? I mean, I tend to buy and sell pretty quickly, but if you start to develop maybe 2 tents, 3 tents, or maybe some are bigger and warmer, you can easily drag and drop depending on the conditions, right? Or like I don't know if it's in here, but for example, I talked about rain pants. I don't bring them on trips out west, but right now Sarah and I are sitting on the edge of the Smoky Mountains, and it's pretty common to rain in this part of the country this time of year. So if it's going to pour rain for 5 days on a trip, maybe I will bring them, right? And I'll drag and drop it in and go from there.
You talked about Jeff, and you talked about food. Like, we were at the dehydrating class that Sam did, which was awesome. But is it a given that you have to dehydrate your food if you're going lightweight packing, or is it not necessary?
Well,
I would say.
Oh, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was going to say it. I mean, it's not a given. It depends on the type of food you're going to do, right? I mean, think about it like this: any food you're taking with you that's not dehydrated, you're carrying the water in the food, right? So if you think about like those, I don't know, like sometimes we'll carry those chicken packets that are like, I don't know, like chicken of the sea, like tuna packets or something like that already has the water in it, that you don't have to rehydrate, then you're effectively carrying the water either way, right? So this trip right here, the no cook, we had a few, like, I don't know, maybe like 4 meals throughout the 7 days that were rehydrated with cold water, but everything else was not dehydrated. So we're talking like jerky, or I guess jerky's dehydrated, but nuts. I'm a big fan of Spam, which not everybody is, or cheeses or things like that, right? So not everything's dehydrated, but it certainly, I think, helps.
Okay.
Well, Bhargava, you can also build your meals around items that you can buy in the store, and we'll talk about that more. And Sam might have talked about it in the class, such as I make a pesto meal that has a seasoning packet, and I just throw like ramen noodles and some walnuts and a little bit of cheese in it, and that's done. So that's not necessarily dehydrated, but it is a lighter weight meal.
Okay.
And Bhargava, we can talk about different strategies for food because, like, for example, on this trip, Sarah and I'll say made the mistake of we packed in like an entire avocado each and some other like store-bought deli meats, and that's pretty heavy, but we ate it on the first day on the trail, right? So you can kind of prioritize your food that way as well. If you want something a little heavier that's not rehydrated, you can maybe eat it on the first day and get it off your back, so to speak, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I have nothing else. I mean, any other questions on lighter pack?
Nope, I don't have any.
Okay. So
Seen it all.
you guys now got two different techniques that you can use to build a gear list. You can use lighter pack, or you can use the gear list spreadsheet that I emailed. That's Andy Skirka's gear list spreadsheet. If you open that up, the spreadsheet itself has lots of links to other articles that he's written on, picking clothes and picking a shelter and picking sleeping gear and stuff. So you've got a couple different options. If you want to go really old school, you could always just get out, paper and a pen and making your list that way, if you don't like using all the technology. But one way or another, I would strongly recommend working on your list, and so that you understand what your gear weighs and where all your weight is coming from.
So you recommend that we get a scale of some sort though for that though that breaks down either into ounces or less.
Yeah, I've got a scale that I sometimes use in the kitchen anyway for other stuff, especially when I'm watching what I eat, right? You're like, hey, I should only be eating whatever, 3 ounces of chicken today. So yeah, for me, it's not necessarily a dedicated scale that I use just to weigh my gear. When I'm not using it to do that, it's up in my kitchen, in a cupboard waiting for me to use it up there.
Okay.
I've got a digital one, but I used to have like an old analog spring scale too. And it was, it wasn't as good, but it kind of worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think they're terribly expensive.
Yeah.
For some of the bigger stuff, like a sleeping bag that's really hard to like measure on a scale, I do have one of those luggage scales with a hook.
Yeah, I've got one of those too, but it's just it doesn't seem to be very accurate. I don't know how far we have to go with our those ounces.
Right. I go to the ounce, but I know there are people who will measure to the gram, and like good for them. You want to measure the gram, good for you. I don't. Yeah, I think if it measures to the ounces, I don't think my digital scale is that expensive, but it measures to, the 1/10 of an ounce, and that's more than enough.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So I think if you look at that gear list, you'll see that, some of those alcohol stoves, I put them down as 3.7 ounces because that's what the scale said.
Oh, that's fun. I was just wondering, I guess, I could go get one of those. That's not a problem, but I just look at, like you say, you can't weigh a sleeping bag on one of those scales. And the luggage scale I have, I'd be doing well if I could split it down to half a pound, increments.
That's what I did when I weighed those quilts. I hung it off the luggage scale and it said 1.4 pounds. And so I said, okay, 1.4 times 16. It's close enough. What am I going to do?
Right.
The kitchen scale that I have, you can put an item on that's a little bit larger than the scale, and there's a whole, like a freeze button. You can hit it and then remove the item, and it will tell you what it weighs.
Cool.
So you can have a little bit larger item and still get the weight.
And if you're really kind of stuck, maybe you just look that particular item up online and just use the manufacturer's spec and, close enough.
Or take it to the grocery store.
There you go.
I'm gonna take my tent to the grocery store.
Well, I can also bring my luggage scale on Saturday if anyone wants to borrow it just to measure a piece of gear. Not a big deal. So at least you'll know where you're at.
Yeah.
Anything else? Sound good so far?
Sounds great.
Oh, all right. So so look over the list and work on your gear list and read the book when you've got time. And we'll see you next week Saturday at Island Lake. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email. You can CC or email Alex and Chris Ann as well. I'll try to CC them both just so we're all in on the loop with questions and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you still want people to take the survey, the ones who haven't?
If they've got the time, that'd be great. It's interesting to see what different people's experience levels are. Man, someone in there has been doing like a ton of weekend trips a year, and boy, good for them. Because I don't, I'm a weekend warrior, but I'm also really busy. So it's pretty impressive to see someone, I think, said they were doing like eight weekend trips per year or something. That was pretty cool. So yeah, it's interesting. It's just nice to get an idea of where everyone sits in terms of their skill level, and then some of those questions like, hey, if I asked you to sleep under an open A-frame tarp, how would you feel about that? And some people are okay with that, and some people are like, there's no way I'm ever sleeping under an open tarp with creepy crawly critters, scurrying through the leaves. So that's fine. So yeah. And I am hoping to give out like an end of class survey too. It's a pretty standard procedure. So the steering committee for the club likes us to do that just to, see how we did. And, it's also a good way for them to address if there were a serious problem, somebody could, raise that in the survey, with some comments or something and get that addressed. So, even if you blow off the existing survey that's out, for the beginning of the class, when you see the one come out for the end of the class, it would be really great for you to fill that out, and give us some constructive criticism too. If there are parts of it you think didn't work so well, or you had some ideas for improvement, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, those are valuable surveys. I use them a lot at work, so.
Yeah.
Jeff, one question, like a tent versus a hammock. Is it a lightweight consideration, or is it just a preference of whichever you feel like, of course, keeping in mind the weather conditions and all that in the trail?
Yeah. Well, I haven't used a hammock yet. Alex has, and he's going to talk about hammocks on Saturday. My understanding, and he can correct me if I'm way off base here, but generally speaking, it's easier to go light on a tent than it is on a hammock because, I can save a lot of weight by putting 2 people in a tent on the ground versus all the material I need to have a hammock plus a tarp over that for one person and all the other pieces and parts that go along with that. But my understanding is, hammocks can be really comfortable, especially if you're the kind of person who, maybe you've got a bad back or something. There's a lot to be gained from those. I think there's a reason they're getting more popular, especially those of us living east of the Mississippi, where there's a lot of hardwood forests that we can camp in.
Right.
Yeah.
I love my hammock.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, Laura, I know you love that.
But it does, it's about 5.5 pounds if you have the mosquito netting, the rain fly, and the hammock, and the strapping and the carabiners and stuff. So you'd have to take something else out of your pack if you want to use it. lightweight.
I don't think the ones Solar has are like the lightest that are out there by any means, but we do own two if
Yeah.
and they're available.
There aren't many I don't think many are, mine's an Eno, and I don't think there are many lighter. You can get lighter if you don't need the mosquito netting or if you don't need your rain fly, but your rain fly can double as you don't have to put your hammock up until bedtime, and you can, if it's raining, you can sit under it and cook under it. And so it's kind of a dual purpose.
Yeah, Bhargava, I would be in a hammock right now if my wife liked hammocks, but she's shaking her head at me right now. No, it's definitely hard to go super light in a hammock, especially if you have more than one person. I can kind of give you the scoop on basically how light people go, and there's a lot of things to consider, like insulation and things like underquilts, overquilts, and it starts to add up. So there are ways to do it, but generally you're not going to get lighter than, sleeping under a tarp or something, right? That a lot of the really ultralight people do.
Yeah.
All right. There's no more questions. I'll end the meeting.
Sounds good.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Yeah. Jeff,
All right.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.